I got a couple emails too in regards to doing the salary schedule. And for those of you that came in a little earlier today to the personal meeting, you saw that Tyler and I were going through it as well. There were more than one way. There was more than one way to solve it as well. But the idea was to use a to use a loop in order to do so. But as I said, I'm going to start by going through the other assignment from 2 weeks ago, the pennies, dollars, and change. Triangle calculator. It seemed like everyone was able to get to that in the end with honestly not as much issues. Like the issues mainly were for I'm not really sure about the syntax on I'm not sure how to write this in Python, but y'all understood it. And as I've been trying to clarify, and I'll keep trying to hit home, the most important thing is for you to understand the problem fully, what's being asked of you, and then to plan it out. And I want to see those plans. A lot of you have been adding more comments into your code, which is great. Documentation is very important because it helps someone see what is it that you're planning to do. And maybe even if you aren't doing something wrong, they may tell you a faster way or a more efficient way of doing it and give you instruction on why. So it helps them kind of understand what it is that you were trying to go for. So let's look at the pennies, dollars, and change assignment. And I'm also going to open up idle here. So I can go and have it going. Okay. All right, there we go. So in this assignment, Stacy's got pennies in a jar, and every 3 months she takes the pennies to the bank and asks them for how many dollars, quarters, dimes, and nickels, and leftover pennies she could exchange for the pennies that are in the jar. So we're trying to help out the bank here by creating this. And so let's do a new shell here. So I'm going to start off plain and simple. I'm going to ask for how many pennies we got. So I'm going to do, well, I'm really lazy, so I'm going to do P. So P is my pennies. So pennies, and I'm going to do integer amount of pennies. And they're going to input the number of pennies they have. So I'm going to say enter the number of pennies. So hopefully Susan counted this correctly. And maybe get a colon. Okay, and so that's my first thing. The next thing that I wanted to do is for it to print out how much that would be for each thing. So how many dollars that would be. Well, as many of you all discovered, that you should use integer division here because that way you don't have to worry about how much is left over. So I'm going to say D for dollars, or I'll do D $sign. If you start it with a $sign, it might actually give you an error. So it might give me one here, but most of the time, well, this was okay in version 2. Version 3, I've never actually tried this. So let's see what happens. If it doesn't, then I'll write out dollars or something. But I'm going to do my D here. And what I wanted to do was integer division for the number of pennies and 100. The reason I'm using 100 is because there are 100 pennies in $1. So this will allow me to see how many pennies are possible. Okay. And another thing is I want to save the result as how many pennies are left over. Now, a couple of you guys did this different ways. You did like remaining or whatever. I'm going to use P again because P has already been used for pennies. And it makes it easier for me to look at to me, this is me personally, that's easier for me to say, okay, this is still the number of pennies I have. So I'm going to set this equal to however much is left over. So to figure out how much is left over, I could take how many pennies there were and divide it by 100 and seeing what the remainder was. So in other words, a modulus, because a remainder to a division problem can be found by using the modulus. Now, of course, some of you guys did this where you took the amount of pennies that are left over is going to be equal to however many dollars there are times 100. Subtract it from how many pennies there were. Right? However many pennies you had, subtract how many dollars you have times 100. That also makes sense. These are doing the same thing because all you're doing is getting the remainder, right? So think about a long division problem. You divide the numbers, right? Then you multiply that quotient times the divisor, and then you subtract it to get the remainder. Well, that's what you're doing here. You got your quotient here, you multiply it times the divisor and subtract it to get the remainder. Both of these do the same thing. Both of these get the remainder. Which one's faster? The modulus, because it's already a built-in operator. And there's some other ways to get modulus a little faster as well. But that's what it's doing there. Again, not the only way. You totally could have done this, which is what actually majority of you did. So, all right. So now that I have my new amount of pennies, I'm going to take that and I am going to get my quarters. Oops, I think I pressed tab on accident. I'm going to get my quarters, and that's going to be my pennies, integer division with 25. Why 25? Because 25 is the number of pennies it takes to make one full quarter. Okay. And so once I do that, I can just rinse and repeat. It's kind of the same strategy what I did before, and do a modulus with 25 so I can see how many pennies would be remaining after the quarters. Next, after quarters will come dimes, and then that would equal the number of pennies we have now, integer division with 10. Rinse and repeat. Our pennies are now going to be how much was left over. And then last but not least, the nickels. Integer division with 5 because there are 5 pennies in 1 nickel. And your pennies now are going to be equal to whatever was left over when you did that. Okay? And so all I need to do now is to print out nice and pretty dollars, and I'm gonna do oops, I'm gonna do F string or F format. And honestly, if I really want to, I could then even go new line, which is what I would do just to save some time here. Quarters, what was that, Q? And new line again, dimes, that's D. New line, nickels, that was N, and pennies, new line, pennies. Okay, and that's it. So I'm gonna save on, and save this here. We should be on number 4. Yep. 1604. And I got invalid syntax. Yeah, I did not like that. So I'll do doll for dollars. That's lame. All right. Enter my pennies, 867. Boom, $8, 2 quarters, 1 dime, 1 nickel, 2 pennies. Now, some of you did a couple of things that you tested it with the example you saw and it worked fine, but you didn't realize yourself that you were coding specifically for that one example. This should work for anything that's done, right? So if I do it again and I do say 875 or 876, I should get $8, 3 quarters, right, for 75 cents and 1 penny. Okay. And that's what I did. I did like 2 or 3 different ones on everyone's code just to test, because I noticed that some of you were coding specifically for this. And again, you weren't even realizing that you were doing it. You would do stuff, you saw it work for this, and you were done. Okay, cool. It works for 8. I'm done. I got this to work for 867. But you want this to work in general. So one thing I would suggest doing is you'll notice even in some of the assignments, there's more than one test case for you to try with. But make up your own for this stuff too. Something else is there were a lot of questions. There were a lot of questions with this assignment, and most of them steered from the fact that you all didn't really plan things out. You plan like the first two things, like, or most of the time it was how to get the dollars. That was easy. But it was, how do I find out how much is left over now and do this? Or how do I get from the dollars to the quarters next, or to the dimes, to the nickels, to pennies? That was the thing that people were having most trouble with. It was continuing from there. But I would always ask, did you plan out? And it would be, yeah, I planned it out. Of course I did. I know I need to do integer division to get the dollars, and I'm gonna use modulus to get a remainder. Okay, cool. What are you gonna do next then? So that wasn't planned out. And so one other thing you could try doing is, especially like examples like this, do it for real. Do it in real life. Get you some pennies, talk it out. If you had 100 pennies, 108 pennies, however many pennies, how would you figure out how many dollars, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies you would get if you took it to the bank? Right? Be little Susan. So walk through the scenario. And that's just good for programming, period. Because that's actually a part of testing and designing, because you want to see how is the customer going to actually use something, or the person that your design is for is going to use something. So, but yeah. Are there any questions from anyone at all about assignment number 2 with the pennies, dollars to change? No questions with assignment 2? Sweet. Sweet. So okay. I am going to go ahead and change this availability until right now then. I think that's enough time for everyone to get a chance to do it. I think I wrote in a syllabus I gave you guys up to an extra week. Making corrections is different than turning it in. Can I see the last little line of code? Yes, you can. That up here. Where's it at? There we go. So I did all mine on one line. You could have split this up into multiple print statements too. I was honestly just being lazy. I didn't want to have to type as much. So I had to type print a bunch of times. So I did it all on new lines instead, but didn't have to type as much. I did like that some of you, when you did this, you printed directly after you got your result. I thought that was cool because it let me know that you were trying to test to see, is this working each part of it as it goes through. And it helps you yourself too when you're coding. If you say, okay, I need to print this out. So some of you had print statements like right after dollars was calculated, then another at the quarters. I like that. That was good. So yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. So let's see. I did something similar, but I didn't take my definition. Didn't take my definition for the nickels. Oh, it didn't take your definition for the nickels. I trying to remember, because I know I saw someone pretty much did all of this except they never saved the pennies as like the remaining pennies. They just kept using the original pennies that they had. And so it looked like, again, it would work for this and it would work for certain other numbers, but it didn't work overall. And I almost did catch it. But it was one of those things where I said that people were coding for the specific example and not to be general. And so they were practicing with their AC7. Oh, I see that works. That works when I do, if I just take integer division for 100, then with 25, then 10, and 5, and 1, and I'm good. And that's not that's not how you would actually do this in real life, right? You would always take a certain amount and then you say, okay, how much do I have left over? And then you'll work with that. So let's see, the example that someone just gave us was they took the dollar amount mod 25. Oh, okay, I got you. All right, so you took the dollar amount mod 25 and then you did the nickels or dimes for 10. Oh, okay, all right, so someone else was giving an example. They said what they did was they did for the dimes, they said they took the dollars and then they did mod 25. And then is that then divided by 25 or integer division by 25? Just trying to see what you meant here. Yeah, if you copy and paste it, because they had a question about how they did it. So if you copy and paste it, then yeah, I can look at it and we can talk about it as a class. That'll be great. I'm trying to follow what you did there. Let's see. Does anyone have their video on? I don't think so. Okay, good. I know I see people keep getting kicked out. So just keep coming back in. I'm not gonna go anywhere until 8:30, probably after that. So just keep coming back in if you get kicked out. It's probably your internet. It looks like we're saving bandwidth, so okay. I tried to use the same F function you use for format, and I got an error, F string single. Okay, so the error that Renee said he got an error when he tried using the F function like I did here for formatting. It says F string single curly brackets not allowed. So that meant that you had a curly bracket on its own in there. And so yeah, oh look, see, someone else already is getting in there. You only have one curly bracket set. So you got to have both of them. You have to have the opening and close one. If you have just the end one on its own, it's going to catch it as an error because it's expecting a beginning one somewhere, because it's looking for those so it knows what to interpolate. So it knows what to, oh, I need to go look for this variable somewhere in this code, or I need to do some kind of special calculation and then make it a string afterwards, after I format it. So yeah, yep, that's right. Yeah, good. And I encourage you all to during the week, and you can invite me to it if it's during my office hours or whatever other time, and I'll be there. If you guys want to form some little study groups too on the side, you have your own WebEx accounts, every one of you. I've mentioned this before. Some of you have already done this, which is cool. But you can invite me, invite your classmates too. Um, Drop us a link and we can join in on a certain day and time. If you're like, hey, I'm gonna work on homework. We'll see, you guys have a multiplication table to do this week. You can be like, hey, we're gonna work on multiplication on Friday at 2 o'clock. Here's the link. Do that. I'm down to join. You know, if I'm available, I'm sure the people in the class would too, because it'd be kind of cool to see how you all talk this out together, as well. So, all right. Looks like, see, yep, Tyler's down for it, guys. All right, let's see. We got an example here that someone wanted to show us how they did stuff. Um, okay, I'm gonna copy and paste it in myself so we can all take a look at it together. So this is what um someone else did. It looks like it's not coming out nice and pretty. I thought it might. So let's see. Oops. That's kind of weird. Why I did that. Let's see. Yeah. All right. So they took the number of pennies in, and then it says if the amount of pennies is less than 0. Okay, so the number they entered was not a positive integer. That's kind of cool. That's a good little check. We talked about putting checks in for things, as well as errors using the assert keyword, in the video last week. Remind me to mention that throughout because it's a cool little thing. It's newer, and it allows you to write your own error, so to speak. So if you see something that you won't allow within your code, it'll automatically stop it and it'll shoot an error out to the user. Um, there's other things like that can use as well, called exception handling. But let's see here. So we got dollar amount. You did okay. Integer division with 100. You got your result. Then you took that same amount mod with 100, and then you did it with quarters. Okay, cool. All right. So at this point in time, I'll just show you, look at this. So at this point in time, your quarters is equal to whatever was the remainder from the number of pennies originally, then the integer division with 25, which this works fine. You know what? Actually, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna run it so you can see where the issue is. And some of you may see what the issue is now. If you do, go ahead and put it in the chat. Actually, that was fine. I'm gonna run this sucker here. Make 67. Okay, cool. So, of course, we're not printing anything. That's for one. Here we go. I'm just gonna print that out real quick. Dollars, quarters, dimes, nickels. I'm lazily printing these out just because I'm lazy. Okay, let's see, 7. All right, cool. So you got 82110. Why is it giving you 0 at the end there? Well, let's look at this. So first, you're taking that, in this example, 867, doing integer division on 100, so you get 8. So this part is working correctly. You're getting dollars correctly. Next, oh, thank you guys. It worked well, but set penny, yeah, nickels wasn't defined? Huh. I was working on mine, so if you wanted to find the remainder of pennies as well, do you just want to continue but make another variable for pennies? Yeah, you would. You'll want to continue, but if you continue, you would be at 1, right? So there would be no reason to, because it should be whatever's left over. But so in this case, they took the 867 and they did integer division with 100 and got 8. Now they took that 867 mod 100, so they have 67 left over, and they did integer division with the 25, and so they got 2. So far it looks good, but now they're starting over again with an 867. So here's the issue right here. Again, it goes back to, how would you do this in real life? Would you go get your entire amount of pennies and say, okay, how many dollars can I make out of this? Cool. All right. How many let's say, how many quarters can I make out of this? Cool. Okay, how many dimes can I make out of this? You wouldn't do that. You would take how much you would take the whole amount, say how many dollars can I make out of this? Put that to the side, look at how much is left over. So each time here, you're going back to the original amount that was entered in. And so that's the issue here. Now, if you had taken each of these and continued going, like here in dimes, if you had took dollar amount mod 100 mod 25 and then did individual with 10, that would work. But it just would get a lot longer each time. And so it would be better to just save that new value each time, if that makes sense. Okay, good, got it. I hope that makes sense. Does it make sense to everyone else too, why this is not accurate? Even though it actually would probably seem to work sometimes. And there was another issue. They realized what the issue was of things not being spelled correctly. But yeah, this would not work because it's not taking, again, that remaining number and working with it. It's still taking the original amount. And so this is very important, especially when you're looking at loops. Like with the while loop, you have to be making a change in it, in the value that you're continuing to loop based off of, like the condition you're looping based off of. If it never changes, that means it's going to keep running forever. Like in your assignment that you had for last week, if you didn't make a change to the employee salary, how is it going to know to do a calculation based off the new employee salary, right? Some of you, I know, ran into that issue. I had a lot of emails about that last weekend too. And then other things about, how do I get a running total? Some of you weren't sure on how to make a change or how to set that up so that it will continue to update itself every single time. So These are important things to not just only look at what is happening at the beginning of a program. You want to understand what's happening at each step. And so sometimes what people do when they're coding is, again, first and foremost, have your plan. As you guys saw, we did this the other day where we like wrote our plan out and then we copied and pasted it with the hashtags in front as comments within our code so that we could just walk through it that way. And something else that people do is they'll put a test case up at each part. So they'll look at, okay, right here, what is this value equal to? Okay, going to the next line, what is this value equal to now? So that way they can walk through and see if it's doing exactly what they want it to do. Sweet. All right. Are there any other questions about the pennies to dollars and change assignment? Okay, cool. All right. So, let's see. So I wanted to look at typical conversions we went through last week. Okay, that's the video for it. I think I told you guys to read chapters 4 and 5 of this textbook this time. And then we went through last week a bunch of different things. We went through Booleans again. We went through conditional statements, while loops, the range function, and for loops. And so I want to go through that again and then continue on from there. So first and foremost, I guess I'll look at the sentence concatenator assignment, because I feel like all of you all understood what to do with this assignment, because this is pretty much straightforward. You get information from the user, and then you concatenate those items together. Hey, someone called in. And so yeah, this was pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
What was that?
it's me. I wasn't able to access it on my computer, so I'm having an issue.
Okay, yeah, that's perfectly fine. You're all always welcome to do so. So, yeah. So for the sentence concatenator assignment, I was just going through and saying that all you did was get user information, and then you just printed out the concatenation of it. Now, let's talk about concatenating. Oops, I'm gonna go back to Python shell. So when you concatenate something, all you're doing is you are adding two strings together. So for instance, if I had the word the and the word dog, and I wanted it to say the dog, what I could do is put a plus sign in between these, and it would say the dog. Now, if I wanted it to have some space in between there, I may have to add in some spaces. Okay. Something else, when you print, you can concatenate within here by giving it a list of the items that you want, to the list of strings that you want. And if you do so, it'll actually, if you put a comma in between each item, it will actually add the space for you. Okay. So that might be a little hint for those of you that still may be struggling on the sentence concatenator. I believe that everyone, from what I've seen in the last, how many assignments do you have now? 2, 4, 6 assignments, 5 to 6 assignments. I've seen everyone do get user input correctly. I've seen you all cast it differently too. Floats, integers, leaving it as a string. So I know you all can take user input. So once you, and I know you all have saved it as variables. So once you save it as a variable, all you're doing now is it's a matter of, you could do this by hand, like I have here, or am I in a space here myself and then having it print, or you could just let the print function do its job, where you give it each one of the strings a comma, and that'll automatically put the spaces in there. Okay. So yeah, so that's all it is for string concatenation. Something else I'll point out with string concatenation, because I thought this is cool. I had to use this recently in an assignment. I've shown you all this before, but just like you can add strings together, you can also use multiplication as well. So if I wanted to get 5 of these bars, if I did the vertical bar times 5, it'll give me 5 of them all together, and it'll automatically concatenate that together as well into one string. So something else to keep in mind if you want to fancy up some assignments in the future. Okay, so that's what you would need to do for string concatenator. Which one was that? Yeah. Go back here. And yeah, so wanting to go over a little bit of what we talked about last week, but really get into the for loops and the while loops to show you some more examples of using them. So let's see where I'm going to do this at. I guess I'll do this in here. So first and foremost, we looked at the Booleans. I gave you guys a couple of I gave you some more examples. I know we did that 2 weeks ago towards the end, and we spent a lot of last week looking at it too. But just remember, there are 4 types that we use in Python for data. We had integers, we had strings, floats, and the other one was Booleans. And Booleans were nothing but true, false. And so true is true, false is false. And then we had other keywords that you all saw last week as well. So we could do true or false. And the or is looking for at least one true value. So in this case, we get true. No matter what order you do it in, it's just looking for one true value. Okay. And so false or true also gives true. Then we had the and function, or and keyword. So it's looking for both things to be true in order to be true. So true and false gives false. False and false also gives false. And true will give true. Okay. So we saw that, and we saw a couple other things that you can do with Booleans. But the most powerful was when you began to use conditional statements. And so an example like we have here that one of your fellow classmates used when they were doing their pennies, this is a conditional statement. And what a conditional statement does is if it evaluates this statement to be true, then it will run the code block that corresponds to that line. So a couple things here. If is a keyword, that's why it gets that orange here. It must include a statement to evaluate. The statement must evaluate true or false. If it evaluates as the number 1 or any other number, it will see it as true. If it evaluates it as any number but 0, it'll see it as true. If it evaluates as 0, it will see it as false. And let's take a look at why. I also mentioned this last week, but just again, if you take the integer value of true, so we're casting the Boolean value true, we're going to cast it to an integer, we get 1. When I cast the Boolean value of false to an integer, I get 0. And so that's why you can have it give you a number to tell it to be true or false, but it is best practice to always have this conditional statement test and return a Boolean value. So for instance here, this says if dollar amount is less than or equal to 0, that means this is going to check, it's going to get dollar amount, it's going to see is it less than or equal to 0. It's going to return true if it is less than or equal to 0. It's going to return false if it's not. Okay. If it is true, then it'll look at the colon and go after it, see what is tabbed in underneath it. Everything tabbed in underneath this if statement is a part of the if code block. This is the block of code it runs when this statement is true. Okay. You will see code blocks in if statements, in if elif else statements, and in if else statements. You also see code blocks in while loops. You also see it in for loops. And you'll see it in functions when we get to functions as well. Okay. All right. So because in our case we entered a number that was greater than 0, this returned false, so therefore it did not print this error. Instead, it went to an else. Whenever you have an if there's an else that immediately follows, those two statements are together. Meaning if this is true, it'll run this code block. Otherwise, it'll go to the else statement and run its code block. Okay. Actually, that's pretty much it. The only other difference thing that we talked about was that you could have an elif here, and what this stands for is else if. So this allows you to have multiple options. So if you only have 2 options, you'll do an if and you'll do an else. If you have more than 2 options, for each one in between, you'll do an else if or elif. Some people say elif. I think in Professor Hastadi's videos, he says elif as well. I say elif. So if you ever get confused what that is, elif, else if, elif, it's all the same thing. We're just talking about another option within your if else statements. But elif works like an if statement. The only difference is that it looks to see what happened with the if statement first. So, and if an if statement returns false, it'll go to the next thing, the next elif it sees, or an else statement if it sees first. But inside an elif, it also needs some type of conditional. So let's say I wanted to do this, dollar amount less than 0, then it'll print error, dollar amount must be positive. Elif, they do a dollar amount, say equal to 0. Notice that equal, to test for equality, we have 2 equal signs. We saw last week and saw the first week too, I believe. 2 equal signs to test equality. Then I can put my colon, and then I can start my new code block for my elif. So maybe I'll tell it to print, go look outside for some change. Because they have no money. They didn't bring any. Else, we're going to do everything else. Okay. You can just use just an if statement. If you have 2 options, you should be using an if and an else. If you have more than 2 options, you should be able to categorize them between if, however many elifs are needed, and then an else statement to finish off. It is common practice to do exactly what Jocelyn did here, which is you do your simplest case, which is actually more of error checking in the if statement, and then everything else just runs in the else. So in those very few cases where something could go wrong or there's need to do something different, do that in the if statement. Everything else, put in the else statement. That is best practice because it doesn't need to check as much in the if statement. Okay. All right. Any questions about conditionals and Booleans? Okay. Common mistake with this is people don't put 2 equals when they're testing for equality. They do 1 equal. That is very common. If you use 1 equal, that's how we assign our variables, right? So variable assigning, you're saying that this is the same as this other one. If we want to test to see if they're equal, we need to put 2 equals. Okay. If you want to say something is not equal, remember that was the exclamation point and an equal sign. So I'll make notes here for that stuff too. So equal for equality. Exclamation point equal for not equal. And I believe you all were comfortable with the greater than or less than. Okay. Now you can use those ors and ands within these too. So let's say whatever reason, we want to test to see if this was less than 0 and if it was even. I could literally type in here and dollar amount, see, mod 2 equals 0. Will equal 0. This would test for both conditions and would only allow you to go to the code block if both were true. If I had or here, this would only work. This would only go to this code block if one or the other were true. So one or the other or both were true, then it would go here. I don't think this allows me to take it. Yeah. So there's something else called XOR, which there is a way for you to use it within here. You all might want to look it up. It's not something that most people use at all. But what XOR does is it's exclusively looking for an OR, meaning one thing or the other is true, not both. Okay. That's to differentiate it from an AND completely. So it's exclusively OR. That's what the X stands for. I mentioned that last week. It's not something that we actually need to go over. I just think it's cool to learn, especially when you're coding. That's what that caret actually does when it does bitwise stuff. Remember when I told you guys to look up what the caret does? I told you it has to do with how it looks at the bits. It's also looking at XOR when it does that. So, okay. So, questions about conditionals and booleans before we continue? No. Nope. Okay. All right. So, let's play around with some while loops and for loops, shall we? So let's see. I showed you all the example with multiplication last week. And this week, how about we do a while loop? Or sorry, we did it with division last week. This week, why don't we do a while loop with multiplication? Okay. So we're going to talk about how to do multiplication. So we're going to do while loop multiplication. Let's just say for whatever reason, our CPU no longer allows for multiplication. So we have to tell it what multiplication is. We have to teach it. We're going to do so using a while loop. So I'm going to comment out all this other stuff because I don't want it to have to run. Normally, I honestly would create a new code file, but again, sometimes I'm lazy with this. So, all right, while loop multiply. So I want to talk through, before we do this, I want to talk through how multiplication actually works, everyone. So we need to plan it out. We need to fully understand the problem. So if I give it two numbers, num1 and num2, we want to talk about how to multiply. So you all tell me, how does multiplication work with two numbers? And we can't use multiply. So tell me, how does multiplication work? If you couldn't use the multiplication symbol, how would you multiply? So let's make it even easier. Let's start off with let's do num1 equals 2, num2 equals 3. Someone already said we have to do repeated addition. That is correct. We're going to do repeated addition. Just like when we did division, we did repeated subtraction. We're going to do repeated addition. Okay? So we got two numbers, num1 and num2. Num1 is 2, num2 is 3. How do you multiply the numbers 2 and 3? I'm in total repeated addition. And so what would that mean for this? So how would I use repeated addition with the number 2 in order to do 2 times 3? What would I do? Okay. So they told me I would do 2 plus 2 plus 2. Good. So I'm doing the first number, so num1, I'm adding it the number however many times num2 is. All right. That's pretty straightforward. So what I want to do is I want to take num1 and add it to itself num2 number of times. Okay, pretty straightforward. All right. So I'm gonna do a while loop in order to do this. And so I told you all for a while loop, it has no determinate number of times that it needs to repeat itself. That means that I am not telling it directly to do 2 times or 3 times. I'm going to allow it to continue to do so until it knows when it's done. And so traditionally, you want some type of way to keep count of how many times it's doing it. And so in our case, we kind of already have something with num2, but I'm just going to put count just because that's a general thing that people use. And so I'll say num2 for a count, so we know it's going to go 3 times. The next thing we do is we do a while. We must give it some type of condition so that it knows so it knows to continue or to not to continue. So in our instance, what is a way that we could tell it to keep going or to not keep going? Because we know we want this to keep going. We want it to keep adding to itself until we've gone 3 times in this example. You all can see that a little better. Sorry about that. So we want this to keep going 3 times. So what can I do to tell it to keep going 3 times? Anyone got any ideas? What kind of condition do I need for it to keep going 3 times? Right, we are using a loop. We're gonna use a while loop. I have to give it a condition to keep going. So, all right, for right now, I'm just gonna put condition here. So we haven't quite done it yet. I'm just gonna put a colon though, because that's what we would do. But we'll come back to that. Yeah, that's fine. If you draw a blank when you're trying to think of a condition, don't worry about it. We'll leave it for now. We'll come back. So within the while loop, though, we need to discuss what is it that we're actually trying to repeat. What is it that you're trying to repeat? Yes, you all taught me repeated addition. So we're trying to repeatedly add a number. In this case, we want to repeatedly add num1. Okay. So we're going to somehow repeatedly add num1. Well, what is num1 being added to? Okay. Num1, yeah. Num1 is being repeatedly added to num1. Okay. So I probably want to save that somewhere, but how about this? I'm gonna take some steps back here because I don't think you all fully understand the problem yet. And remember, that's step 1. Like, we wrote a plan out. That's great, but we need to fully understand what is happening before we can code. So let's just take the number 2 times 3. You all said that we would repeatedly add 2 3 times. Okay, that's great. So the first time we do it, we start off with the number 2. Okay, this is the first time we do it. The second time we do 2 plus 2. Okay, and we get 4. The next time we do it, we do 4 plus 2, 4 plus 2 more, and we get 6. And then we're done. Okay, so until it reached 6, right? But excuse me, we did this until it reached the number 3, until we went 3 times. All right, we weren't doing it until we reached the result. We did it 3 times because we were doing 2 times the number 3. So we want this to continue in the loop until it reaches this number. So like I said before, this is why traditionally you have some type of count. We're going to keep going until we reach that num2. You know what? I'll get rid of the variables. I'll put 3, just that way you guys can be familiar with it. While we reach a certain condition. Oh, actually, I'm gonna leave this as 0. So while the count is still not 3, then we want it to keep adding. So I can do num1. This here. Add it to itself. You know what? I'm gonna get rid of that too. I'm just gonna do 2. This one here. Total. Set total equals 0. I'm gonna do total plus equal the number 2. Okay, so while the count is less than 3, I'm going to do total plus equal 2. So what does this total plus equal mean? Well, this is the same thing as doing total equals total plus 2. And this is called a compound operator. So we've seen that over the last couple of weeks. But what this allows me to do, it makes it easier to write. And Python knows that you're going to save this variable to itself after making this change, which is adding 2 in this case. Right? You can write it out. And for some people, it's easier to understand it being written out, and that's completely fine. Okay. So, well, let's run through this here. So if we we have 0 as a count. Total starts off at 0. And what I'm doing is I'm saying while the count is less than 3, I want it to add the number 2. And it's going to keep adding the number 2 until the count is less than 3. So with the while loop, I told you guys last week to start off with some kind of count. Traditionally, you use some kind of count. You may even have a running total in there still too. But you need some type of condition that it knows to, as the condition is still there, it'll keep going through the while loop. It needs something that is going to be repeated. In this case, we're repeatedly adding 2. The last thing is you need to make sure it's going to terminate, meaning it's going to stop. If I ran this right now, it would continue going on forever. Does anyone know why? Why would this continually go on forever right now? In other words, why would this not terminate? I haven't ended the condition. That's right. The condition is count is less than 3. Is count ever going to not be less than 3? Not the way this is coded right now. Right? Count is 0. So I need something to keep the count going so it knows that it eventually will get to 3. And so I can do that by simply doing a plus equals 1. So which is the same thing as saying count is going to be equal to count plus 1. Okay. And honestly, this is exactly how you guys multiply. You start off with some number as a total. So you start off with nothing, and then you say, okay, I'm going to have 2. So I'm going to add 2 to it. Then the next time I'm going to add 2 more. I got 4 now. Then the next time I'm going to add 2 more. I got 6. Now I've already gone 3 times, and so I can stop. Okay. All right. I'm going to run this so that you guys can see that it'll do exactly what we said it's going to. Well, I never told it to print anything out. Print 2 times 3 equals total. All right, so 2 times 3 equals 6. So it did it. Well, that's great and all. I got it to work for 2 and 3. But we probably should make this more general, right? Than just doing hard coding this to work for only 2 and 3. And I can do that. If I use num1 as the first number and num2 as the second number, that means every time I had a 2, that really should be num1. Every time I had a 3, that really should be num2. So if I go in here and change this to be num2, and we're adding 2 num1, count still is going up by 1 each time. So now I can change this guy to be num1 times num2 is going to be equal to whatever the total is. So now we just generalized it. So we start off with, we haven't done any addition yet, so count 0. The total's still 0. While the count is less than whatever the second num is, we're going to add to the total the first number, and the count's going to go up by 1. So that means you're going to come back here again. You're going to add num1. You're going to increase the count by 1 more. You're going to keep going until you've the count has gone however many times num2 is. So if I run this now, I get 6. 2 times 3 equals 6. But since now this has been generalized, I can write whatever numbers I want in here for num1 and num2 and get my result. Now let's just see if it did this correctly. Oh, it did. Okay. So, and this will take some practice, and there are some videos that you all can watch as well online. Don't feel if someone asked me would I be offended if you looked at some other stuff online besides Professor Steady stuff. No, I encourage it. And if you want more examples of other videos, let me know. I think I've said this before. I have like tons of stuff. I am currently taking a data science course that uses Python programming. So seeing how to do data analytics within Python. And I kid you not, I get so much extra materials that they tell me to read, and most of it I'm like, okay, I already know how to do this, so whatever. But sometimes I may learn like, oh, there's a newer way to do such and such. For instance, there's another way to do a for loop, which we'll see. I was planning on get to it today. We may still get to it, but it looks a lot easier, and you don't have to worry about setting up a code block or anything. It does it all in one line. So I'll show you all what that looks like. Hopefully today, if not, maybe next week. And there's another way to do an if statement, actually, another way to do a conditional, which I actually want to show you all too at some point. But I have tons of material out there. There is tons of material out there. I have tons of resources too. So if y'all ever want, like, hey, can you show me another way of doing this, or show me a different video besides Professor Studies, let me know. I got plenty. And there's plenty out there that you guys can Google search to on your own if you want to. But I do want you to ask, especially if anything is ever lost. The while loops, in my opinion, honestly, they take time. And the way that I began to understand it was getting it to crash over and over again, because I kept getting it stuck in infinite loops. I can't tell you how many times that has happened to me. And it honestly, it still does sometimes. Sometimes I'll do this, do something easy. I'll have my code ready to go, and then I'll look and I'm like, oh man, I forgot to make sure this terminates. Not even like this. Maybe I'll put down the wrong number on accident here. Maybe I accidentally type 0 instead of 1, or however much I need it to actually increment by. And then it doesn't stop. And I'm like, man, what's taking so long? And I look at it, and I'm like, oh, I didn't have this terminate. So it is something that you can make a mistake of less and less, but it takes practice. So important things to remember with the while loop is having some type of count in some kind of way. And there's other ways to do that as you continue moving forward. Sometimes you may need to have a running total. You may not at all. It may be done all within here. You need a condition that is going to cause the while loop to know when to stop at some point. And you need to make sure there is a way to terminate it within here. Okay. So some type of count, a condition, so it knows to keep going, what it is that you're repeating, and a way to guarantee it's being terminated. Okay. That's a while loop. So, any questions about while loops? Okay. Anyone want to see another example? While loop? All right. Not sure how to ask it. Yeah, that's fine. It may come to you. Just or try your best to put it into words. What it is that you want to know. So I'll do something simple. So you know how we did the how I showed you guys earlier that you could take a string and multiply it times a number and it'll concatenate that same string that many times. Well, let's do that within a while loop instead. As we know, string concatenation works with pluses. Let's make it work with multiplication using a while loop. So this demonstration is going to be bad. All right. We're going to do a while loop for multiplication string concatenation. So I'm going to call it. All right. And so in that case, you're going to need some type of string from the user. Call it S, which is going to be a string from the user. So I'm just going to do input, enter the string to print multiple times. And then maybe we want to know how many times to repeat it. So I'll do n, and this is going to be the number of times to repeat. So I'll do this as an integer. How many times do you repeat the string? Let's make it look a little fancier here. All right, so now that we got that, we want to get the string from the user and we want to ask them how many times we want it to repeat. Okay. So what I want to do now is I want to concatenate that string together that many times. So in other words, example, if I had star and I entered to repeat 5 times, I want it to print out star, 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 star. So star 5 times, okay? So how are we going to do that? Using a while loop. Okay. So if we start off, how I said, we have a count of some kind. At this point in time, we haven't done anything, so I could put 0 here. Some type of running total. So what is the running total? Well, in this case, it's a string, right? So instead of putting 0 there, what did I put? I put in our case, the equivalent of having 0 string, so nothing in it. In other words, an empty string. So you will see this commonly used. This is called an empty string. This is commonly used. So anytime when someone wants to do stuff with a string and they start out with nothing, this is how they denote they start with nothing. Because if you put 0, you're now saying that, for instance, total here would be an integer. We don't want total to be an integer, do we? No. What we want to happen is for it to be an empty string so we can add to it. Okay? Okay. So let's do a while. We're going to have some type of condition. I'm just going to put condition for now. I'll come back to it in a second. And each time, what do we want it to repeat? Well, each time you want total, you want to add to it whatever the symbol is. So I'm going to add to it S. So whatever the symbol is. So in this case, it was we're going to enter an asterisk in our example. Okay. And the count is going to go up by 1. That way it knows to stop at some point. Well, right now we're still having a condition. How do we determine what that condition is? How many times do you want this to go? When does it know when to stop? Especially with us having a count. How would it know when to stop? Okay, someone said 5. Okay, good. So until the number of times we've gone through this is 5. Yeah. So not the total, because the total is a string, right? So yeah. So until the count is less than 5. So that means when count is 0, it'll go through it. When count is 1, it'll go through it. When count is 2, it'll go through it. When count is 3, it'll go through it. When count is 4, it'll go through it. You'll notice that that's 5 numbers. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 5 numbers. So good. So this will work. So I'm going to run this. Oh, well, probably want to see our result. So I'm going to print it. So I'm going to print total. Okay. All right. So it says enter string. I'm going to put the little ampersand. Sorry, asterisk, not ampersand. This how many times repeat. I'll put 5. Boom. We get 5 of them all together. Okay. I'm going to run that again. All right. Let's say this time I need to do dashes. And it says how many times to repeat that string of dashes. So I'm going to say 20 times. Hey, those are tiny. Only gave me 5 of them. Only gave me 5 of them. Why did it only give me 5 of them? Ah, there is. Someone said it. To make it more general, could replace 5 with N. Good. Good. All right. So because we had 5 in there, because the example we were looking at had 5, right? So this is a good example of how using examples can be helpful, because using that example, I was able to get the setup for it to work for the example. But then when I tried using other cases, what did we see? Oh, I realized that I actually hard coded it to only work for when count was less than 5. That means it would always print it out only 5 times. This way, it allows it to print out multiple times. So we'll do that again. I'm gonna give it the dash, and I'm gonna give it 20 times, and give me 20 dashes. Okay. All right. Questions about the while loop? All right. At any point, if you have any questions, please let me know. That's what we're here to do. So you all saw one other type of loop, and that was a for loop. Many of you used it in your salary assignment. The difference between a while loop and a for loop: a while loop should be used again when you don't know the number of times it needs to go through the loop, how many times the iterative statement needs to be repeated. You should use a while loop. because you can set up a condition for where it should terminate. With the for loop, if you know exactly how many times it needs to go through, you should use a for loop every single time. So if you know it should go 6 times, 5 times, 20 times, 180 times, whatever it is, you should use a for loop. So anytime you know for certain how many times it goes through, you should be using a for loop. Okay. So with the for loop, before we began that, I told you guys there was a special function I wanted to teach you all about. And again, we did this stuff last week, but it was the range function. And the way the range function works is it's range, and in the parentheses, you put in certain numbers. If you put in just one number, it will stop at that number. So in this case here, range 3 will stop at 3. And that means it will go 0, 1, and 2. Okay. This is very powerful for people because if I want something to go 3 times, I can just say range 3 and call it done. Because it's going to go 3 times because it's going 0, 1, and 2. That's 3. Okay. Another way to use range is to give it a start and end. So if I want it to start, let's say I want it to start at 2, and I want it to go to 6, and give it a start and end, and that means it'll start at 2 and end at 6. Means it will go 2, 3, 4, 5. Because it started at 2 and it stopped when it got to 6. Okay. If you gave it 3 numbers, range, let's do 2, comma 10, and I tell it to count by 3s. What this will do is it will start at 2, end at 10, counting by 3s, which means it will go 2, 5, 8. Because if it went to the next one, that would be above the 10 mark, right? Okay. So let's take a look and see how what some of these look like within a for loop. So for a for loop, you begin with 2 keywords, for and in. And in between these, you put some kind of dummy variable. It doesn't matter what you call it. It would make it for any variable, like you do any variable, you should name it something appropriate. In this case, I'm just going to call it I because we're dealing with some integers. And I'm going to say in range of 3, we're going to do each of these. And I'm just going to tell it to print I so that you all can see that it literally is going in that order. So 0, 1, 2, and then we'll do the other examples as well. Okay, so I need to comment out some of the other stuff we had done before. Our S's and our N's here. I'll be honest with you too. I actually would use a different integrated development environment and a different IDE because a lot of them will allow me to like select all of those at once and then press special commands that will comment them all out at one time. That's what I actually do in real life. Just so you guys know. But this is good for practice using what Python created themselves and gives to you. So anyway, let's run this and see how this goes. Oh, let me do that again so you guys can see what error is. What is IDE? What IDE do I use? So I use Visual Studios. The reason is because I can do multiple languages within there. And sometimes I use online IDE known as Jupyter Notebook, and that's just because the classes I'm taking, they give that to us to use. What is an IDE? So integrated development environment, and so it's where you're building your application. So it's a combination of the tools and the interface. So, okay, wait, did you guys see the error that came up? It said something about the print statement. Let me do it again. Missing parentheses in call to print. Did you mean this? So as you can see, sometimes it'll even tell you directly what the mistake is and how to fix it. So it printed out 0, 1, 2. Is that not what we expected? Yes. We expected 0, 1, 2. All right, let's do the 2 and 6 here. 2, 6. Let's run that. Race 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's do 10, 3, 2, 5, 8, which is exactly what we expected to do, 2, 5, 8. Okay, so all of these can come in handy. Let's say you needed to, for a reason, write out your multiples of 3. You could do that with here, right? You could give it a starting point at 0 and tell it to go up until whatever number you want it, and tell it to count by 3 is just going to do it. So if I want to do my multiples of 3, for instance, I can say start at 0, and I can keep going until I got to 1,000. This is going to be crazy. But I'm going to have it give me all the multiples of 3 from 0 to 1,000. So let's see how long this is going to take to run. Okay. All right. Okay. Whee! It didn't take too long. 333 different numbers, as you guys can see. Right? It's a crazy amount of stuff. So, but I can do that very easily. I can have it go through a multiple amount of items. Of course, that was a little silly of me, making it do 333 different lines printed out. But that was just to show you how fast it was too. So that wasn't like super fast, but that was still faster than you all probably could print out yourself, right? Or if you put it in Excel and then drag down with the fill handle, that still was faster. But yeah, so just want you all to see that. Let's see, what did we try to do last time? I think last time we were trying to do the -1, which when I did some, because I wanted to do some research to see why it wasn't working, because this should work. Apparently, it only works in certain. See, like it didn't even run, but apparently it only works in certain versions of Python where you can do the range and have it go backwards, and now that's how you could have it count backwards. So what I'm told is that. So let me show you guys here. Is that what I would have to actually do for here is to do this in the version that we have. That's what I was told. Let's see if it actually works. Yeah. So in the version we have, to make it go backwards, what we needed to do is actually give the last number first, comma, then the first number. Then the step can now be negative. So then they'll know to count down. Okay. View it the other way, it won't print in the version we have. Now, some versions will work perfectly fine. It just depends on what version you have. So you could do a quick test just by like typing a 4, I in range, and seeing which one works. That'll be fine. Okay. Hopefully this won't be as confusing when we look at some strings in a moment. There's some other lists, but yeah. So the range function can be very helpful. As you can see, it makes it really easy for you to say specifically how many times you want this for loop to run. And notice it was printing I. I was this dummy variable. As you can see, I is set equal to whatever part it is on in this range. So for the last one, it started at 10. So I was 10 the first time. So it printed out 10. Then it went to 9. And so I was 9, so it printed out 9. Then it went to 8, and I was 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then 1. And so I could manipulate that and do things with this I, because it is a variable. It's just like a dummy variable, and it's saved to whatever instance we are on in this list over here at this point in time as we go through the loop. So if I wanted to, I could take each one of those and multiply times 2 and get a result. And so now we have each of those times 2. And I can manipulate it as much as I want. Also, I don't have to do anything with that I if I don't want to. If I just wanted to go through 10 times, like we just did here, it's going from 10 backwards. So it's going through 10 times. I could say print blah, some random stuff that many times if I want to. Run it, and it's going to print that 10 times because I told it to do it 10 times. So I say that because the dummy variable you use here does not matter. It should be named something that makes sense, just like you do with any other variable. It should make sense because it'll make it easier for you to see. It'll make it easier for me to see when I'm doing code review on it and giving you feedback. It'll make it easier if you're using this in the real world. But this essentially does not matter. All this does is save itself to whatever part of the list that it's currently on. Therefore, you can then use that within here. Notice how I keep saying that this is a list, because it is. And a list is a special type of data collection. Data collection. We talked about data types before. So a data type being a Boolean, a string, an integer, or a float, right? Those data types. Well, a data collection is a collection of data that could be any of those types. So that's what a list is. There are a couple of different collections. There are just a list, just to be general, a list. There are arrays, which are like your best friend. There are sets. There are tuples. And there are dictionaries. So we will look at each of these in this course. A list and a set are not necessary to be taught in this course. I am going to show them to you because I feel that they could possibly be useful to you in your future. The set would probably be the least likely thing that would be. The list would definitely be useful because all of these are lists. Everything else we look at is a list. So if you understand how a list works, you'll understand the others because they fall underneath it. But the others have other special properties as well that you can do with them. So I do want to look at those. So for instance, a range is just a list. It's straight up a list. But a string, for instance, this string here, is actually an array of characters. So I'm gonna do here. I'm gonna make this only do a few times because we'll use it in a little bit. But let's say I want for character, and I'm just using the word character because it makes sense as a variable, and I'm gonna put a string here, and I'm gonna put one of the greatest first names of all time, and I'm gonna have it print out that character. So range was a list, right? It gave us a list of numbers. This, I said, well, a string was an array, which is just a list. It's a collection of data, but I said it was a collection of characters. So, which that means that if we were to use a for loop on it, this character is going to be equal to each instance of a character within this array or within this list. So in the case of a string, that means this guy here, C, will be the first time. The next time it goes through, it'll be H. The next time it goes through, it'll be R, then I, then S, and so on and so forth. We'll see what that looks like if I were to print that, or I was to run this. As you can see, it went through that list of characters, that array of characters, and we got CHRISTOPHER, which spells Christopher. So that's what it did through each one of, that's what it did through this for loop. So for a character equal to whatever's in this list at each instance, print out that character. And so it went through this entire list until it was finished. Okay. So it does not matter what type of list that you have here. There are other, so the two lists that you've seen so far, have been arranged, and we've seen an array of a string, which is an array of characters. There are other lists too, and so I'm going to start off by teaching you guys about an array. Oh, I think that's probably the most useful. So an array. So an array is just a collection that uses square brackets around it. So you can put any type of data type you want in here. So numbers are essentially what most people think of when they see one. So this is just an example. But that's not the only thing you could do. You could actually do, like I said a string is an array of characters. So I could do this. So on and so forth. And that would work too. I could also be really crazy and have an array of arrays. Okay. So let's see, how would you use that though? So let's say I had 4 item in an array, and let's say I had the number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 in here, and I told it to print item. Ooh, forgot my parentheses are on it. Sorry, I've been working in a language too lately where I don't have to put parentheses around things I print, so I get used to doing that. All right, so see here it went 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 because that was every item in that array. These are actually called elements. And so the cool thing about these elements is each one of them has a certain spot within the array. Same thing with this string up here. It's an array. So every array has a special spot. So the items, or I should say elements, the elements in an array are numbered starting at 0, and then they continue forward. So for instance, this is the 0th index. That's actually why I chose these numbers, because to make it a little easier to understand. But this is the 0th index. This would be the first index. This would be the second index, third, and fourth. Okay. Even though this is the first item we see, the first item we see is the 0th index. The second item we see is the first index. The third item we see is the second index, and so on and so forth. Okay. So, what does that mean? Well, I told you all that strings are an array. So I'm going to show you something that can be pretty cool to do. So I'm going to take a string, and I'm just going to use my I'll do this in idle. I'll do this in the shell. Hopefully everyone can see well here. So I'm going to save S, which is going to be a random string with my name, my first name here. And so what you can do is you can tell Python to look at a certain portion of a list based off its indices or indexes. And to do that, because an array is, and like most lists are, they use a certain set of brackets. Square brackets are used to denote that I'm about to pick something out. I'm about to pick a certain portion out of the list. And so if I say, for instance, 4, what this means is it's going to go and it's going to return to us the 4th index of whatever S is. Well, S is my name up here, so I'm going to look for the 4th index. Remember, our indexes start at 0. And so we'll have C will be 0, H will be 1, R would be 2, I would be, S would be 4. So we're expecting this to return S. So when I do that, notice it gets me S. If I ask for the whole thing, it gives me the whole thing. If I ask for 2, 3, it gives me an error because I should only be entering in indices. By doing a comma here, it sees it as something else, which we'll look at in the future. But for right now, let's say I did want to get multiple parts at the same time. How would I do that? And so to get multiple parts, say if I wanted to get everything from 2 to 3, I would have to do a colon. And that would tell it to get everything up to that point. Just like we did with the range, it told us everything up to that point. And that's actually what I'm writing in here. This is a range. So if I did 2, 4, this would get the second index and the third index. Because starting from 2 and going up to 4. Look, it said RI. If I wanted to go from 0 to the fourth index, so to get up to the S, do that, and it returns crit. So it gets the 0, the first, the second, the third, and the fourth index. Puts it all together. I don't actually have to put the 0 in it. If I were to do something like this, it automatically assumes if nothing's there, it's going to the 0th part. On the other side of that, if I were to have it put a number in the beginning, then put a colon and have nothing afterwards, it would go until it reaches the end on its own. So it's another cool feature of it. I don't have to put a beginning or an end. If I don't want it to start at the beginning, I can leave that part blank. If I want it to go all the way to the end, I can also leave that blank. So I don't have to sit and try to figure out what it is. Just like with the range, how we had a start and an end, we had a step part, right? So how much did it count by? Same things in here. So if I wanted to start at, say, let's just do the 0th thing and go to the end. Well, I'll say if I want to go from beginning to end, but I want it to count by 2s. That's how I would do that. So it allows it to step through that very quickly. Okay. All right. And so that is what you can do within an array, just as some of it. So imagine the power you have with that, using that in combination with a for loop. There are other things you can do as well. Some people spell Christopher quite differently. They don't use a C, H, they use a K. And let's say I wanted to do Christopher spelt in that fashion. Well, what I could do is I could take where we at here. I could take the first index up to, sorry, the 0th index up to the second index and say from now on you're going to be K. And then there's an issue here. Because I'm trying to assign K to multiple parts. So if I just did it to this part, this should allow me to go. Why are you not letting me in here? String object does not support item assignment. Yes, you do. Just did you? Don't tell me you changed. All right, I'm gonna keep then. So it's saying that it's not allowing that with string assignment. I don't know if that's with the version we have, because I literally have just used this in another assignment that I was doing. So because the idea is for you to be able to replace something in an array with something new whenever you want. So if I want to replace a certain element, I should be able to replace it at any moment's notice. So what I'm going to do instead is I am going to cheat. I'm going to have it to go from 2 to the end and only get the second item or second index onward, and I'm going to add to it the first part. And so now it says Christopher with a K. Okay. So I'm going to have to do some research to see why this version is now allowing this to occur. But that's pretty much it for arrays. Now you don't have to do just strings. You can have an array of anything if you want. So if I had an array of numbers, and I want to say the third thing onward, I could do that, and it says it's array 3, 4. So I want to see if this allows me to do it here. Okay, see, yeah, that allowed it there. So it allowed me to do it here, where I was able to assign any part of this array. So the third index was 3. Now I want to say, no, I want to make it 5 now. I can just assign it at any moment. I'm going to assume, again, I'm going to have to do some research on this. Because like I said before, I was able to do this literally. I worked on my homework on Thursday. So it is a different version of Python I was using, though. So as they make changes to versions, some things are different, but not too much. I'm assuming they did this to protect strings, that they made a change here to protect strings. Because this is the latest version that we're using here in this class. So there are other ways to make changes to a string, and we'll look at that as we look at more string manipulations later on in this course, which actually may be next week or the week after. I have on the schedule at least. But just working it within an array, this is how you can make the change to any index in it. You can just say, go to this index and do this instead, set it equal to something else. Just the same way you assign other variables. Okay. All right. Okay, yeah. Are there any questions at this point in time about arrays, about for loops, about while loops, using range, and Booleans and conditional statements? Anyone, anything? I'm going to use the rest to look at homework. Okay. All right, in that case, let's take a look at this week's homework. So multiplication table. And let's make sure we have an understanding of the problem. Maybe give you guys some hints to get started. So multiplication table. The purpose of this assignment is to provide practice with nested loops and some basic math. Write an original Python program that asks the user to enter 2 integers for creation of a multiplication table. One integer would be the starting column value of subsequent 5 values, and the other would be the starting row value of 5 subsequent values. The program then builds a printed multiplication table of the of the values in a 5x5 grid. Okay. So if you put in 5 and 8, it would go 5, 6, 7, 8 because that would go 5 times. If you were to go, sorry, what was it? So, and if you had how many rows you had, you told it started 8, it would go 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. All right, so save the file, your title, your description. Okay, you should only use stuff that we've talked about in this class so far. We did talk about lists. I mentioned dictionaries. I don't expect you guys to use a dictionary. But you can't see the screen. Anyone else not see the screen right now? Okay. What's happening? All right. I wrote that here so you can use a list if you want. It's not actually necessary to do so, but you can. I do not expect anyone to be using a function because we haven't talked about a function yet. So no one should be using a function. So if I see that, that means that you probably went online and just like, all right, I want someone else to do this for me. And it says to display in a graphical columnar output. Does it have to be perfectly in columns like this? No, but there should be some type of column look to it. So let's take a look at a couple of things here. Making this multiplication table. So I go to here. So understanding the problem. Thank you. I did sneeze. Thank you. So understanding the problem. So doing the multiplication table. Okay, so the user is first and foremost what's happening. The user is entering in number of columns. Then the user is entering in a number of rows. Or I should say the entering in the number of columns to start with. So if they enter in an 8, we start at 8, and then we do 5 of those. So user entering the number, how the best way to say that, the number that column starts with. Maybe that makes more sense. Then they're going to enter number that row starts with. Okay. Remember, every single time, this is going to be a 5 by 5. So, maybe I'll do 3 by 3. Just because I can. In this example here. But your homework should be a 5 by 5. So they're entering the number of columns to start with. They're going to enter in the number of rows to start with. Okay. And what happens after that? We print out all of our beautiful multiplication, right? Okay. So there are tons of ways to do this. I even said in the instructions that you can use a list if you want. So some of you may do some research and find a way to do it with a list. Not something that you have to do, but you can find some if you want to. So anyone have any ideas on where we could start? Or what else do we need to understand about this? We know it's going to then print out the grid. So there's more going on when it's printing out the grid, right? For instance, how do we know what this first row of numbers is? Anyone have any idea how we know what those first number is? This first row is? Count up 4 from the number given by the user. Nice. A good way to start. Yep. So, first row. Well, as someone said, it's counting up to that amount that the user gave you. So if I tell you the columns start at, our example was 5, and we want it to go up I guess I'll just do a 5 by 5 grid because that's what you guys are doing at homework. This is just to help you guys get started on it anyway. So we want it to go up by 5. How we do the first row? Well, I could call first row, and it's going to be whatever the number they gave us, right? And we need it to go until it reaches 5 more. So a couple of ways to do that. How do I want to show you guys that? I'll do. First, let's get the amount from them. So we'll call it column. Going to equal the integer value of the input. Enter column to start with. Oops, I didn't put quotes around that. And then maybe for this guy, I'll do enter my rows. Same kind of thing. Int input enter rows to start with. Okay. So that first row is a string. I don't know what to put in it yet. You guys said it has to be that number, and then we're gonna count up 4 from there. So only there was a way I could add some things in repeatedly. Oh, we talked about a couple of different ways today to add things repeatedly or to do something repeatedly using a loop. That might be a great way to start. So how about we try that? So I could do, as you said, count up to, maybe I can use a while loop. I could do a for loop too, right? Because I know I need to do this exactly 5 times, right? So it doesn't matter to me which one we do. Does anyone have a preference, while or for? I'll take the first thing I see, while or for. Wiki. Wow. Okay, gotcha. Wow. All right, so we do a while loop. Okay, so this might be good practice too. So let's just say our count. I got you. So we're say count. I'm gonna start at 0. And we already have our first row. That'll be my total because I'm trying to add everything into the first row. So while the count is less than 5, because this time we want it to specifically be 5, right? Because we're doing a 5 by 5 grid. I'm going to take first row, and what am I going to add to it? I am going to take the number I got from columns, and I'm going to do something a little crazy. I wanted to add that number to first row, but it's an integer right now, right? So I need to make it a string because it's the only way I can add strings together. So I'm going to make it a string by doing a cast to that string. And something else I'm going to do is I'm going to add to it a tab in the beginning. And the only reason I'm doing that is so it gets some kind of flavor here with moving over. There are other ways to make it move over and have some kind of space in between. I'm just using tab here just for right now. As I said, there are tons of different ways to do this. Okay. All right, so while my count is less than that, I'm going to be adding in the column, the number of columns, which is 5, and I'm going to have it at there. You guys said that we could have it go up to 5 times, and only thing now we need to do is make sure our count goes up, and that should be fine. It should be fine, right? Okay. Let's see. I'm just gonna run it and see what happens. I guess I should get rid of some of this other stuff so it doesn't slow us down by trying to print all of that out. Honestly, wouldn't take too long for it to do, but okay, let's run this sucker and see what happens. Enter the stuff to start with. We're gonna do 5 and do 8. Nothing happened. Ah, I did forget to print it. Maybe that's all it is that's gonna be wrong. So someone said to me it's not because of the way I asked that. So yes, you're right. It put 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. It did it 5 times. Something else that I need to do then, so I can make it increment up. So I did it 5 times. Clearly, there's something else I need to do then to make it change. Anyone have any ideas of something else I could do to make this columns go up each time? There's a couple of ways to do this too. Don't. If you got an idea, shout it out, type it in, because there's more than one way to do this. Because essentially this is working. Okay, Ron says to create an array. That's not a bad idea, right? Because I could totally do that. I could create an array that's going to go from 5 up to the number that we want it to, right? So I could totally do that. And if I was going to do that, that might be a good idea to use a for loop at that point, because the for loop already uses that array and you can go over it. So since we're in the while loop, I'm going to do something different. Nah, you know what? Let's use the array. Just because I can. So I'm going to call it column R, so column arrays. This way you guys get practice with looking at an array too. So my first number in it is going to be my columns. My second number is going to be columns plus 1. My third number is going to be columns plus 2. My fourth number is going to be columns plus 3. And my fourth number is going to be columns plus 4. Does that make sense to everyone of where I got those numbers from? All right, so columns is my first one. Second one is going to be plus 1. Third one. Okay, good. So just like we just did with array. So we'll have 5. 5 plus 1 will be 6. 5 plus 2 will be 7. 5 plus 3 will be 8. 5 plus 4 will be 9. Right. And so that means all we need from here is for it to go through each one of those guys. So at 0, the 0th index, the first index, second index, the third index, the fourth index. If only I had something else that started off at 0 in here. I do, count does. So instead of making another variable to do that, I can actually use count in here, because count's going to be going at the same exact rate. This will be pretty cool. Each time it's going to go, so count's going to start at 0. This is going to say 0, and it's going to get the 0th index, which would be 5 in our case. It's going to add 1 to count. It's going to go to 1. It's going to get this first index, and it's going to keep going. Let's see how that works here. So 5, 8. Let's see what happened here. It did not like something. Int object is not scriptable. Hold on a second. Let's see what's going on here. Boop. Did I spell everything correctly? I did. Oh, I didn't spell it correctly. Sorry, that's my bad. The list that has all our columns is called col R now, not columns. So we'll do that. Okay, now we got 5, 6, 7, 8. So with Rodney's suggestion, that works perfectly. Again, that was not the only way to do this. Since we're already using count, we could have just taken the column number and added count to it. because that would have given us 5, then 6, and 7, and 8 as count increase. Could have used a range within here as well. If we went the for loop route, we could have done that too. Yeah, so there were a couple of different ways. But I'm glad someone spoke up and see we were able to work with it. That's another thing. Even though you guys are new to something, the ideas that come to your mind, you may be able to work with. And don't worry about finding the most efficient method or anything like that either right now. The idea is to get things working so that you understand what's happening. So anyway, we have our first row printing out just fine. The next row that comes out, let me go to, this here is all of these underlines here, which we don't really have to do if you don't want to. But what we do need to occur is we do need this multiplication to happen, right? So where are these numbers coming from? Anybody got an idea where these numbers are coming from? Where's this 40 coming from? Multiply the row by column. Yeah. So excuse me. Multiplying the row by the column. So we have a list of columns because we just created an array that handles that. We probably could do the same thing with rows, but we now would need some way for it to know when it's on this row to print out the product of these guys, to go to the next row and print out the column, the product of these guys, go to the next row and print out the column of these guys. Oh, I'm kind of saying the same thing each time, right? So I'm repeating something over and over again. Anybody have any ideas how to do something repeatedly in Python? Yes, we can do a loop. Now, again, it comes down to which loop would you prefer to use. As I said before, while loops are best used when you're not sure how many times something should occur. So you just set up a condition to end it. A for loop is best when you do know how many times something occurs. For instance, we know this is going to be 5 times and then 5 times because it's set up to be a 5 by 5 grid. Okay. So a for loop might not be that bad of an idea to use in this case. Plus, we already did a while loop once, so maybe let's look at a for loop to see how to do stuff as a for loop. So that first thing was to get our first row printed out. So now we're going to talk about actually building the grid loop. And let me do this up a little bit so you guys can see more so what's happening. Okay. All right. So I'm do a for loop here. All right, that's all I got. Need some help here. Need some help here. You all told me we're going to multiply the row by the column. So whenever we do a for loop, we need some variable. And we need a list of items after that. So got any ideas on what our list of items should be? I can call it a dummy variable, anything. For now, until someone gives me a better name. Row, okay. I like that name, probably a little better row. A list in. If we're looking for row here, what should our list be? So we're looking for each dummy variable, which is just like row. Okay, so you guys confused. All right. So for variable doesn't matter. I'll dummy again. We need a list of items to go across. You all said we're going to multiply each row by column. I need a way to do that. So if we go back to the problem at hand in the example, what is being repeated each time is what's going to go in the code block, because that's what's being repeated. We need to know how many times to do it. That's what the list comes into play. So it needs a list to go over. So I'm going to read off again kind of what you all said we're going to do. We're going to take this row times this column and put it here. This row times this column, put it here. This row times this column, put it here. And we're going to get all of the rows times column for this guy. We're going to go to the next row and do that again. Someone saying something? Okay, sorry. That's someone has something to say. So how do we, let's just start off with just getting this first row. You're good. How do we start off with just getting this first row? You guys said row times column, but where is that row and column? Where are they saved into? Row 1 and column 1. Okay, cool. So we made a array of columns earlier so that we could know that we're in the 0th index, the 1st index, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Right? So that was useful earlier when we printed the first row. Again, it's not the only way to do this, but that could be helpful as well, right? From based off what we already set up. We don't have one of these for rows yet. We can make one though, right? Okay. So how about we give that a try? I'm just going off of the array thing because that was set up earlier. So we've made what if we made an array for rows? And then we had rows was the first one, rows plus 1, rows plus 2, rows plus 3, and then rows plus 4. Okay, so I'm gonna put an example above these. So call R would be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then for our example down here, row R would be equal to, we're going to start off with 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Okay. So, make sure to add S. Oh, thanks. Catch. All right. So, what is it that you all want to do? You told me we're going to multiply each one of these times each of these guys, and that's how we're going to fill it out. We need a way to loop through each of these, though, so that we know we're in column 1 and we're going to multiply all of these guys, or we're in row 1 and we're multiplying it times all of these guys. Okay. Anyone have any ideas on how we could go about doing so? Okay. So I got for row in, and someone said maybe table. There is no table that is actually created, right? We're just printing out each line, so it gives the illusion of a table. But you're not on the wrong track. Let's just say we're gonna look at each row that's in our list of rows. So row R. Okay. And so that means the first time we go through this, it's gonna be this entry. The second time we go through, it'll be this one. Third time we go through, it'll be this one. Fourth time we go through, it'll be this one, so on and so forth. Okay. All right. So for our example, we have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. What do we want it to print out on this first row here? Well, we see it printing 8, right? And then there's some type of spacing here. Then it puts 40, which you all said was the row times the column. Then it went to the next one, no little spacing. It did the row times the column, and it kept going. So what we see here is that 8 is being printed out, or 8 is being put there, and then it goes to then it adds some spacing, and then it goes and gets the product of the row and column. Then it adds the next row and column one, adds the next one, adds the next one, adds the next one. So it's repeatedly adding the product. Oh, the product of R1 times R2, R2. Yes, yes. So each time we're multiplying R1 times C1, and then R1 times C2, R1 times C3, and we keep going as we move down. That's exactly correct. So since we're repeating it, how do you handle stuff that's being repeated? I got an idea? In a loop. Yes, that's correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off, and I'm just going to call this something strange. So I'm just going to call this line. And what I want it to do is I want it to string whatever the row is, or yeah, what row we're currently on. Then I'm going to add that tab to it. And you'll see why I'm doing that in a moment. But as you said, I need to do a loop in order to multiply. And you guys said to do the column, so I'm going to do COL for column R. Okay. So for row in row R, we're going to create the line. We're going to add whatever that row is. So in this case, we got 8 for the first one, all right? Plus a tab, so it's doing 8 and then a tab. Now we're looking at each column. You guys said another for loop with the columns. And what are we going to do with the row and column? So right now, row is equal to 8, and column is equal to 5. What are we going to do with those two things in order to get this value here? Multiply them. Good. All right. So I'm going to do line plus equals whatever we get when we multiply those two guys. Okay. And I'm going to add another tab afterwards. I think I'll probably add too many of these, to be honest with you. But okay. All right. And so once it does that, it needs to go to, well, let's see what happens. I'm just kind of walking through this right now based off our code. So you guys got all the columns. You printed out the first row. You all seem fine with that. The next thing that you wanted to do was to go to each row, and on each row you wanted to take the product of the row times column and print it off. So walking through what we have done so far, let's actually see what happens here. Yeah, I'll just do it now. So it printed out the first row. That's it. What am I missing then? I'm missing something from here because I only saw the first row. It only printed out the first row. All right, yes, I have not printed out each item. That's correct. So let me ask you, so someone said, could we print out each column? If I printed out each column, think about how print works, right? So if you print out each column, you know what? I'm just gonna show you. I'm just gonna do it. It's a good place to start off with. Why don't we try printing out each column? So if I print out each column, I want you guys to see what happens here. 5, 8. So I printed out each column, but because of how print works, it puts it on a new line each time. So instead of maybe the column, notice how I created a line here to do to take whatever the row is at the beginning, add a tab, and then I started taking the product and adding that to line. That way we could print out each line after we were finished. So here, print out each line. Again, this is not the only way to do this. Just make sure that's clear to everyone. This is not the only way to do this. So print out each line here. Let's do that. Try 5, 8. Does this look kind of close to what we want? Yes, yes, it is. This is not the only way to do this. So I took the idea that Rodney started us with of having an array. We did for the columns. We use that to print out the first row. We can take that same concept to do the with the row. We can do that same concept with the rows, and then use that within a for loop. Do you suggest we try using it without R? That's up to you. You can use R so you guys can get used to doing so. I suggest try, like, for instance, honestly, we're done right now with this first part assignment. Of course, you have some things to fix up with it. If you wanted to copy this directly, you'd have some things to change up, right? And I want you all to play with that, making it look more appealing than what we have right now. Because yeah, I'm just gonna run it so you guys can see what I mean. If I do it for, like, what the other example was 125, and I'm just gonna make up another number. This might start looking a little weird having, the extra spaces behind there. Why not before? Yeah. And so I would suggest just trying to play around making this look a little better using the arrays. I'm perfectly fine with. After you finish your other assignment as well, then I would definitely go back and try to start from scratch. But this way you guys have a good starting point already, so you won't stress out about it. Because this is not the only way to do this. Using two for loops, one within itself, a nested loop like we did here, is probably the best thing to do here, but it's not the only thing to do. You can honestly do this within just one loop. My mind immediately went to doing two nested for loops, but as we were doing this, I realized that I could actually do this in one. So I want you all to just kind of explore and play around with this after you've completed your other stuff too. That way you get some time to go with the code. Because again, this is not the only way to do this. Give you a hint right now. What if you just kept building this line, printed it out? Because all it is, if you really look at it, or what we had up here with the multiplication grid, notice that all of these are just going up by 8, right? Every single time they're going up by whatever this number is on the row. So you literally could have it print out the first product, and then the next one just say whatever the previous product was plus whatever this is, plus 2 times whatever it is, plus 3 times whatever it is. You could have it do that in one line, and it literally would just print it all out. And then have it go to the next one. So that's one way to do it in one for loop. So for each one of these, have it go to the row and do that. These are all, it's a 5 by 5 grid. You could do a for loop that goes in range of 5. And so then you're only starting out with the 0th part, which would be these two numbers multiplying. And then as you went through, you would multiply each part. There's honestly, there's so many ways to do this that are coming to mind now. I'm just going to stop talking about it because I don't want to confuse you all. And hopefully you're not confused at this point in time with using the array, because that is a new concept to you today. So hopefully this was clear to everyone. The double for loop, if I were you, I would run through this in your mind to see how does this make sense. That we would take the row and the whole adding the tab part and then doing the product here. Why are we printing line inside of this for loop but outside of this one? I would run through that to see why those things happening. Okay. But yeah, I do want you all to play around with how it looks. Okay. So any questions about this homework assignment, multiplication table? Anyone? Okay. So the next assignment, also due on Tuesday, is a generation classifier. And so I give you the ranges here, so you don't have to worry about trying to look them up and figure out where they are. If you use something different, let me know within the program description. So this is just to practice with if, elif, and else statements. So the idea of this is to write a Python program that asks the user their name and the year they were born. Some of you may remember that from the very first or assignment 01, because I accidentally had that in there. I didn't delete it. But the idea of this is to display a message that contains their name, their birth year, and generation. So the name and birth year, you're getting that from the user. So giving them a sentence that says that, that's pretty easy, right? So so-and-so's name that you got from them, comma, being born in, the year that you got from them, comma, puts them in this generation stuff, which this information can be found here. And you're supposed to be using if, else, and else to do so. The user should be prompted to enter their name and then prompted to enter their birth year, like this, so 4 digits, using an if, elif, else statement. Yeah. So yes, you can. Someone said just make an elif for each one. Yeah. So you're gonna, of course, start off with some kind of if statement. Then you would have an elif for each one, and an else for maybe the ones you don't put in there. Okay. Again, multiple ways to do this, even with that. So it's up to you how you decide to do this. But that is a good suggestion. Just doing an elif, doing an if, and then elif for the others, and an else for the last one. It makes perfect sense. But you want to do this to determine which generation category they fit in. If the year is less than 1910 or greater than 2025, the output message output a message that the year is invalid. Oh, maybe that could be your if and else's. Maybe doesn't have to be. Does not have to be. You can even use ands in here, right? You can do all of these in multiple lines. So here are a couple of examples here, so you guys can test those out. So yeah, I am testing to see how you use if, elif, and else within this. Your generations are given here. I think this one's more straightforward. You'll probably have begun to notice that your 2 assignments each week, one is very, very straightforward. The other one requires you to think I was gonna say a little more, but probably a lot more, and play around with it. But it's not like skills that we haven't looked at all. It's just something that you have to think a little deeper on. I hope you all are enjoying these too. It seems like a lot of you are getting excited even in your frustrations sometimes. And it reminds me of like when I was first learning, or anytime I learn a new language, sometimes I'm like, oh, why is this not working? Give you an example. I was telling you guys about the arrays, how they start off at the 0th index. Most coding languages do, like every one of them. There are 2 that I found that have not, because the people that created them were creating them for specific purposes, and they decided, oh, that's stupid starting at 0. It should start at 1. So imagine your whole life, every language you've coded in has started at 0. You know how often you'll make a mistake and not start at 1 in a new language that always starts at 1? Every single time. And sometimes it's like 8 hours of frustration not knowing what's going on and why it's not working until you realize it's the same thing every time. You are starting at 1 now and not 0 because this language is stupid. Okay. Yeah, that's happened. I'm working in a new language known as R, and that happens all the time to me. I'm starting to catch on to it though. That's the first thing I'm starting to look for if I have a mistake, and it actually is usually always the case. So, but while you're going through these, there are times you're gonna get frustrated, but then afterwards you're gonna be like, you know what, that was great. I'm glad I went through that because now I know how to do this now, or things are starting to click. So, my suggestion is to go through this first, get through it, do it, make sure you have everything the way you want it to be, because I think this will be more straightforward. Then go back to the other assignment, see where you can make tweaks and changes to what we did, especially on how it's outputted, because right now it doesn't look the best, doesn't look the cutest, kind of ugly. So, but that's it. Yeah, we got about 4 minutes left. Are there any questions about anything? Anything? And again, the stuff that we've gone over so far, we're gonna keep hitting for a while because it is the foundation of everything else you do. Everything else, data types, operators between them, conditional statements, loops. You need to know that so you can do everything else. Everything. The things we learn about the loops, like using the arrays and stuff, that's a part of that same thing. Because you have to use, for loop, you have to use some type of listing or data collection in order to use a for loop. So, questions, anyone, anything? Okay. Not yeah. You feel free to email me, ask questions. I'll be in office hours, 4 to 5:30 as well, Tuesday through Thursday. Yeah. Some of you have been emailing, texting, which is great. Do what you need to do. Ask any question you want. I love how some of you are actually turning in assignments with comments like, "Hey, can you tell me what's wrong with this?" Do that too. Just let me know, especially if it's like days before things are due. Let me know that so I can go ahead and take a good look at that to help you out. So yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, got 3 minutes left. So if there are any questions, I guess I can let you guys out 3 minutes early. I'll ask you a question. I guess, has anyone seen the new Bill and Ted movie, Face the Music? If you have, let me know if it was good or not. Yeah. Okay. All right. I will see you all next week then. You all have a great weekend. Enjoy coding. Enjoy doing some nested loops and having some fun with some loops. Thank you all very much. Yeah. If you have any questions that you didn't feel like sharing in front of everyone, that's fine. Stay afterwards. Yeah, no problem. I love helping you all. I love coding. I love doing this, and hopefully you all can see that. So